Welcome back to The Explainer. What if I told you the stock market basically runs on an honor system? Today we're diving into a really strange paradox. Companies that follow the rules perfectly, even when there's almost no punishment for breaking them. It's a puzzle that kind of changes how you think about rules and power. Okay, let's kick things off with this great analogy from our source material. Imagine a highway where the police are incredibly lenient. I mean, they almost never pull anyone over. And yet, every single driver sticks to the speed limit. Perfectly. Sounds kind of impossible, right? And that, right there, is the central mystery we are digging into today. Why do these massive, publicly traded companies follow all the rules when the referees barely ever blow the whistle? So let's break down this financial puzzle. So yeah, this is what we're calling the highway puzzle of finance. And to really get our heads around it, we've got to understand the rules of the road first. First, just a little background. You see, exchanges like the New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ, they aren't just marketplaces. They're also rule makers. They set dozens and dozens of requirements that companies have to meet just to stay listed. And look, these rules cover a huge range of stuff. It's not just about simple numbers, like making sure your stock price stays above a certain minimum. No, they get deep into a company's business, dictating really complex standards for how its board of directors has to be structured. Okay, so who are the cops in this highway analogy? Well, they're the stock exchanges themselves. And this is where things start to get a little complicated because they have this built-in conflict of interest. See, on the one hand, the NYSE and NASDAQ are these official regulators supervised by the SEC, and their job is to protect investors. But then, on the other hand, they are for-profit businesses that are competing like crazy with each other to attract and keep companies on their exchange, because those listing fees are a massive source of revenue. This creates a real push and pull dynamic, a tricky balancing act. If they enforce their rules too harshly, they risk scaring companies away to a competitor. But if they're too soft, they could totally trash their reputation and get the SEC breathing down their necks. So what tools do these exchanges actually have to enforce the rules? Well, this gets us to the absolute core of their problem. Their options are, let's just say, extremely limited. The formal process looks pretty straightforward. A company gets a notice that they've broken a rule. Then they're given a pretty generous cure period. We're talking many months to fix the problem. And if they don't, the exchange can delist them, basically kick their stock off the exchange. But here's the thing. Delisting is the nuclear option. It can absolutely devastate a company's stock price and its ability to raise money. And because it's such a drastic punishment, it often ends up hurting the very investors the rules were supposed to protect in the first place. That makes the exchanges really, really reluctant to actually use it. Okay, with all that in mind, let's look at some data from a 2019 study mentioned in our source material, because this really deepens the whole mystery of these lenient cops and perfect drivers. Okay, so first off, check this out. The data shows that the vast majority of enforcement notices, like 72%, are for simple black and white stuff, like a stock price falling below $1. They're almost never for breaking those more complex, and you could argue more important, corporate governance rules. And then there's this. Even when a company does get a notice, very few actually end up facing delisting. One study found only about a quarter of companies that fall out of compliance even begin the delisting process. Most are just given plenty of time to get their act together. Okay, now you've got to hear this. For the most important governance rules, the ones about how the board is structured, the exchanges usually only find out about a violation because the company reports itself. The police aren't catching speeders. The speeders are calling the station to confess. And the result of this whole honor system? Well, a study of all S&P 1500 companies found how many violations of those key board independence rules? Exactly. 0. Not a single one. Perfect compliance. So this is the heart of our whole puzzle. We've got lenient cops who barely write any tickets, and they mostly rely on drivers to report their own speeding. Yet nobody speeds. Ever. What in the world is going on? Well, the answer, according to the research, doesn't really lie in the formal rules and punishments at all. It's all about something much more subtle. Think of it like an unwritten handshake. The source for this explainer calls this a relational contract, and it's basically an agreement where the real enforcement isn't a lawsuit or a fine. It's the threat of ending a really valuable long-term relationship. So let's break down how this actually works. A company really values its prestigious spot on the exchange, right?
And the exchange values the company's listing fees, so both sides want to keep this relationship going. The company complies with all the little rules diligently, almost like they're building up goodwill or insurance. They're showing the exchange, hey, we're a good, reliable partner. In return, if a problem does pop up, the exchange is way more likely to use a quiet, informal chat to fix it, instead of just dropping the hammer of delisting.
So, at the end of the day, the relationship itself is the enforcement. You just don't need a cop on every corner when both sides have a massive incentive to cooperate. The threat isn't a small speeding ticket, it's getting kicked off the highway for good. And this unwritten handshake is what finally solves our paradox. We see perfect compliance not because companies are afraid of a specific fine, but because they're afraid of damaging that valuable, long-term partnership with the exchange. And this leaves us with one last really important question. I mean, this informal system seems to work surprisingly well, but what happens when a problem comes along that's just too big to be solved with a quiet phone call? This reliance on relationships is a hidden strength of our markets, but as the source points out, that very same informality, well, it could be a double-edged sword.